Hello ladies and gentlemen of the internet, welcome to the channel. My name is Frankie and in today's video we are going to be building an enclosure for one of the cutest of the animals that Asia has to offer, and that is the pangolin. And that's going to be added to our franchise mode to Little Asia on console. Let's get to it. So the first thing that I decided to build for my pangolins was the habitat house, and that is the part of the enclosure where they'll go to sleep, get a bit of cover and get away from the public. Now, frustratingly, I don't have the footage for that. For some reason it has disappeared from my USB, so all I can do is apologise for that. But a brief overview is that I used only pieces from the East Asia theme pack, all building pieces from that. We used a few rounded corner floor pieces and a few 4x4 normal to create a kind of oval shaped building with a nice tiled terracotta roof. I had my mechanics working whilst I was building the last enclosure to make sure that I had the East Asia theme pack ready for this build. And what you can see here, me building the fences, this is made from various bits of wood from this same theme pack. I'm trying to make sure that this animal is being housed in an enclosure that has been built from appropriate materials dependent on where it comes from in the world. Now this is something that I kind of wasn't thinking about too much on the previous two enclosures, which I'm kind of annoyed at myself for. When I was building the red panda enclosure, that definitely should have been East Asia and not India. They just don't live in India as far as I'm aware. They need the colder climates of the eastern parts of Asia that have the mountainous region of the Himalayas. So I really should have been matching that a bit better with the other enclosures. But going forward, I'm going to try and make sure that even though all of this is Asian themed, it's going to be a bit more specific to the animal. So yeah, I'm copy and pasting this rather simple fence around the perimeter of our enclosure. It's simply a post with 3 planks in the middle, and I really like this. It kind of reminds me of a farm. It looks very barnyard to me. As always, copying and pasting and slightly adjusting to get the perimeter of the enclosure does take a bit of time. But I do believe creating your own barriers like this add just a little bit of personality and make the park on a whole, or the zoo on a whole, just look a little bit more personal and therefore better. It looks different. It's not going to be like something that anyone else has built. So yeah, I'm quite happy to sacrifice that time to make it look just a little bit better. And once I'm done with the fence and I'm happy with its general layout, it's time to add the null barrier. This will ensure that this area actually registers as an enclosure so that keepers can enter and feed the animals inside. And as per usual, I forgot to make sure that the building could take a exhibit door, so I need to delete part of the wall and install a wall panel that has a little doorway in it so that we can actually place our staff door. And whilst I'm here dealing with the door, I realised that the tiling on the roof, those lovely terracotta tiles, just kind of end at the edge of the wall. They need to overhang a little bit, so I pick those necessary parts from our building materials or options, get them into place, and it just instantly ties that roof together. It makes it look a lot nicer by having the tiles overhang slightly. You can see there that I did pick the wrong angle. There are various angles you can pick for these roofs, different pitches, and when it comes to this bit, if they don't match up exactly, it will look a bit strange. So just make sure you've got the exact right pitch. Once the habitat gate had been added to our null barrier, I decided that I wanted to cover it up because it looked a little strange inside of this building, and there's a bit of a gap between the door and the door frame. So I looked through our building options, our construction panel, and found this lovely East Asian themed door, and I'm just going to lay it over the top of it. I am going to change the colours, however, because that red is a little bit too vibrant for the general feel of this building. It's quite a nice muted colour so far. To have such a vibrant and bold red kind of just separates it a bit too much, so I adjust the colours accordingly and bring it down just a touch. I also want to ensure that no pangolins are launching themselves out of this window to terrorise the public, so I'm going to install a little bit of glass into this window frame, and I'm making sure it is one-way glass, because if this is where the pangolins are going to sleep and probably eat as well, then they should do so undisturbed. We don't want them to be feeling like stressed out at all due to the public's prying eyes. So I'm putting some one-way glass so that the guests can see into the exhibit, but the pangolins can't see out. So they don't know that there are any people there watching them eat. There really isn't much room inside this little shelter, but I do manage to put down a food bowl and one enrichment item. And that enrichment item is the scratching post panel kind of thing that looks like it's meant to be wood. Something for the little pangolins to scratch their back on. It's rather adorable when they do so. As usual, the best way to find out what terrain and plants are needed in the enclosure is to have our animals be delivered. So here we go, we're going to have the pangolins drop down into this enclosure so we can find out exactly what they need. Going over to the terrain tab allows me to know which parts of the terrain need to be altered, and then I can do so to try and match the specific animal needs. And just like always, it's just a matter of jumping back and forth between the different texture brushes to get a nice balance and something that kind of looks aesthetically pleasing. To achieve a more nice looking enclosure and a bit more of a natural looking enclosure as well, I think it is important not to use huge chunks of the same texture. If you were to do a clear dividing line of grass and rock, then it's just not going to look very natural. I like to be a bit more sporadic and do the patches a bit more at random. Unless, of course, like you see here, I'm placing some rock around the edge on all the sloped and exposed areas, because grass isn't going to be growing on these vertical areas. It won't happen as often. So it makes sense to have rock in those areas. But if you're not dealing with different gradations like that, different levels of ground, then just be random with it. It creates a much more natural and random looking texture. Now we move on to what is probably my favourite part of any enclosure build, and that is adding the foliage. I think this is my favourite part because it just fleshes it out so much. It just instantly brings an enclosure to life, because at the moment it's just a weird bowl full of dirt and grass. And in this enclosure in particular, I did something kind of cool that I didn't set out to do originally. I decided to start laying some blocks or big stones, whatever you want to call them, round the perimeter of the enclosure just to mask the slope. But I quickly realised that maybe I shouldn't do copy and paste all the way around. We already have an enclosure that looks like that. That's what we did in the Red Panda one. So maybe we should be a bit more sparse, use it a bit more sparingly, and just place them in a select few outcroppings, I guess, a few select areas of rock. And I started to fill this corner in, and I decided to do it at varying heights. So nearer the back it's a lot higher, and near the front it looked a lot lower. And I'm using these ones with algae on them because I wanted the whole enclosure to feel very rainforesty, a bit more jungly. And I couldn't help but feel that this kind of looked like the kind of place where a small pond would appear. So that is exactly what I did. I raised some of the ground underneath the rocks at the front to ensure that there was an adequate space for water to go into. And then I filled it with water, and it creates this lovely looking pond where you can just imagine a few frogs hanging out. And by adding loads of lush foliage to this area as well, it's really going to sell it. After I've got the rocks how I want to look for this little pond kind of feature that I've created, I then go and create a few small clusters of rock throughout the rest of the enclosure, and then move on to the plant life, starting as always with trees. Like I said before, I think it's much better to start with the larger items, as they are going to make the biggest difference in your enclosure and really help to change the shape of it. So it's good to get that stage of it out of the way so you can actually see what you're working with much earlier on. So once I've got the trees in, I can start to fill it out with lots of bushes and flowers and more intricate plants. When it came to adding the rest of the plant life to this enclosure, I was quite lucky in the fact that the pangolin has a threshold of 25%. That's how much it needs in terms of coverage of plant life in order to be happy. So I had loads to work with. I could really pack the foliage into this enclosure, and that's exactly what I did. I made sure that around our little pond area there was quite a lot of plant life, because of course there would be. It's rich in moisture, and therefore plants are going to grow a lot easier in that area. There's also a other pond that I put in, just a really small one, just in case the pangolins can't easily drink from this one that I've made that looks really nice. It's just a general dip in the floor, the other one I made. We're going to be using a lot of bright flowers and rich green shrubs and such. I'm even going to use a bunch of leaf litter, tropical leaf litter, under each of the big trees. It just adds a bit more. It helps to cover the ground and make it look less samey. And I can't remember the plant. I think it's something like the scabula bush. Scabula. I can't remember. It's a really large green shrub that spreads out quite far. I really like dotting these about all over enclosures because it's a way of quickly covering quite a lot of ground, but making it look, I don't know, it adds difference to it. It doesn't look like the grass texture or the mud texture. Adds a bit of height, adds colour, and it's the kind of thing that you can then pop flowers in. You can sink flowers into that bush to come springing out of it. It just adds loads of colour. As I said, I really want to pack in as much plant life as I can in this enclosure without overdoing it. We do actually want to be able to see the pangolins. If the guests can't see them, then it's kind of all been a waste of time. And that does not exclude the pangolin house. In there, we're going to put a bunch of small plants just to make them feel a bit more at home. And of course, we're going to add their bedding, which means we can start to focus on adding their enrichment items as well. And just like we had with the flamingos, these guys are quite lucky in the fact that a lot of their enrichment items have been unlocked by having already researched the red pandas. So we've got various cardboard boxes, foraging pit, herbs, scent markers, some balls, sprinklers and scratching boards. There is loads for these guys to play with without having done any research on the animal yet. So it's all good because we're going to be having a high welfare from the get-go, and we can add more later once the animals have been fully researched. In terms of the placement of these items, there's not too much thought going into it. I like to just place them as randomly as I can. However, the only thing that I do bear in mind is, okay, I guess there's actually two things to bear in mind. One, the sprinkler always goes near their water source just because I think it makes sense. And two, I try to spread out the enrichment items as much as I can to try and ensure that the animals actually use their entire enclosure rather than just sticking to the water source or food bowl. And with those few bits done, I think we're okay to call this enclosure complete. Now, this video is a little bit shorter due to the fact that we forgot to include the pangolin building at the beginning, but I promise our next animal habitat will indeed have one. And that next animal to come to the park is going to be the Komodo dragon, which is very, very cool. So if you would like to see the Komodo dragon being welcomed to our zoo, Little Asia, then make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. Also, maybe consider giving this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and leave comments down below on what animals you would like to see in this zoo. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.